And now, if you are interested in this big world that we're living in right now, this particular word that we call entrepreneurship, now is the time. You've probably heard of Stephen Bartlett, one of the most successful young entrepreneurs of the world these days, but he's better known for his global hit podcast, Diary of a CEO. So in this education session, lived lessons for young entrepreneurs, we are going to put Stephen on the hot seat for a change. And his interviewer today is the brilliant Maitha Mohammed. Give him a round of applause, please.
Yeah, hello, Allah. Good day, everyone, and welcome. I'm Maitha, a creator, entrepreneur, like most of us here, and I'm delighted to be the moderator of this session. Ladies and gentlemen, from starting his company from his bedroom, to taking it public, to investing in multiple startups, to hosting an acclaimed podcast, The Diary of a CEO, to authoring a book with the same title. I mean, what can't he do? Ladies and gentlemen, let's warmly welcome to the stage Stephen Bartlett.
Hello.
Hello and welcome.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Let's get to the chase. Mr. Bartlett, you encourage people to make mistakes. Through your books, through your talks, you encourage them. You're all about, make mistakes, make more mistakes. And in your book also, you encourage asking difficult questions. So let's start with one.
Okay.
Yeah? What is one mistake you don't mind repeating?
Oh gosh, one mistake I don't mind repeating. I think, interesting, I was in a Q&A session earlier, and I said that the biggest mistakes I've made in business are all bad hires that I made. The best decisions I've made in business as well are all good hires that I've made. So I think one mistake that I don't mind repeating is hiring people that are bad. And I say that because it's inevitable. It's absolutely inevitable. I assumed that there would become a day when I'd hired 2,000 people or 3,000 people, and I would finally figure out how to find exceptional people. But having been there and interviewed some of the world's greatest CEOs, I've come to learn that that's actually not the important thing, and that regardless of how good your interview process is or how good your intuition is, you are going to make mistakes with people. The key thing, the important part, is what you do when you realize that you've made a mistake. And this is really the key thing. And I was saying earlier that the most important conversations in business are the ones that you're avoiding the most. And it's the same with hiring. If you know you've made a mistake, you have a couple of choices. When I was 23, 24 years old and running this big business, what I would do is I would avoid the situation. I would move the person to another part of the business. I would justify it in my head. I'd give them more time. But what great entrepreneurs do, what a company like Netflix does, is they have that conversation straight away. When you hire a bad person, it costs you 18 months typically. 6 months finding them, 6 months realizing that they're not a good fit, and then 6 months finding someone else. But in my mistakes, very early in my career, I'd spend the 6 months hiring someone, I'd spend the 6 months figuring out that they weren't right, and then it might take 2 years for me to have that uncomfortable conversation.
Oh, wow.
And that's the critical part, is what you do when you know you've made a mistake. Most of us ignore it, in our personal lives and in our businesses. But as I said a second ago, the definition of the word company is group of people. And the great idols of mine in business, Steve Wozniak was here earlier, who I actually met several years ago, but his co-founder, Steve Jobs, said it himself. He said, people think that Apple is my brilliance. They think it was something I did. But he said, I did the difficult, excruciatingly difficult thing of going to great lengths to find truly exceptional people. And when I found these exceptional people, he said, it propagates, it spreads. And that is business. An A player hires an A player. A B player hires a B player. And a C player hires a C player. The game of business is people. It is the first principle of being an entrepreneur or a founder. And this sounds obvious to some of you, but it's absolutely not what entrepreneurs do. If you look at an entrepreneur's calendar and look at how they've allocated their time this week, you will not find them spending 20 or 30 hours this week hiring. That's what you'll see in my calendar. And the great entrepreneurs that I've met, whether I was with Dan Yelek, the founder of Spotify last week in LA, or the founder of a $100 billion Coinbase when I interviewed him, or Brian Chesky, who built Airbnb, a $100 billion business, they all know this. They all know that the three principles of being a great entrepreneur are assemble great people, bind them with a culture that makes them do the best work of their life, and set them a vision that's worthwhile. So when I look at your calendar, it should look like that.
Love it. When we usually stumble upon a piece of content of highly successful businessmen on social media, I mean, there is no nicer way to say it, but they most of the time seem to be disconnected, like they're either talking from a high horse, or they feel like genuinely not interested in anything that wouldn't directly increase their wealth. Mm-hmm. Unlike you talk about, you advocate for mental health, and you care about the relationship with your coworkers. When did it click to you that what we are being taught is wrong, and this is the way to grow a business, focusing on mental health and the relationships?
I just think it's interesting, because I'm 32 years old now. And when I started my business, I was an 18-year-old. And when I started my even bigger business, where we had hundreds and hundreds of people, I was 21. So the environment that I grew up in and the generation that I represent and was as a leader have a different set of expectations. They've grown up in a different world. You know, my father's generation, business was hierarchies. The boss sits in a big glass box and is a dictator to everybody else. And
yes,
really,
it's not as obvious as today. So this is what I'm asking you. How did it come to you?
I mean, it didn't come to me because this is the generation that I grew up in. And if you grow up in a generation where every single one of your employees has social media, and they can post whatever they want, good or bad, and everything they post is determining how many other good employees want to come and work for me. The working world changed in my generation. It went from a black box where the image of the company and the leader was painted on the outside by the PR department to a glass box where the world can see inside. And how you treat your people and your company culture is your brand. It is your brand. So if you want to be innovative and you want to be caring and you say that you care about your customers, then you have to care about your people because your customers can see. And that's the big shift. I was born in the generation of glass box employment. It's also why, as a leader, I have a personal brand. And this is why leaders, if you want defense in the world we live in now, if you want defense from the press or whatever else, it's a good job to build a personal brand and let the world know you so that you can define yourself instead of letting something else define you. So, yeah.
So love it. Can we say that focusing on mental health and the relationships came because you believe in focusing on the little details? You believe in focusing on the 80% that people would ignore?
I guess so. I think the mental health thing is it's A, because I'm in the generation where it's become destigmatized and it's what people talk about. Mm-hmm. And B, my objective is to, as I said, find the best group of people and bind them with a culture that makes them do the best work of their life. So I'm contending with those two principles. How do I get the best group of people to come here? In a world where they can look on Instagram and see every company and how every company is treating their employees and team members, and their expectations have gone up and up and up and up, right? And then the second one is just making them do the best work of their life. And in the world we live in, if you're trying to get people to do great work, they really need 5 core components. They need a sense of challenge. And this is proven by psychology and game psychology, where if the task at hand is slightly more difficult than your skill level, you will be motivated and engaged. If the task is below your skill level, you will lose motivation. If the task is too far beyond your skill level, you'll also lose motivation. That's why video games increase in levels slowly, because it keeps you motivated. Work needs to be the same. You also need a sense of forward motion. I know I've interviewed some great performance experts, Sir David Brailsford, who is now the performance director at Manchester United. And before that, he was at Team Sky. He took that cycling team from depression and down and out, winning nothing, to the greatest cycling team of all time. And his thing, he said, okay, the 1% mattered, but the big thing I noticed was that when we found these small 1% gains, people felt like they were going somewhere, momentum. They stayed in the office, no longer at 6 p.m., they stayed till 2 a.m. That's the power of feeling like you're going somewhere. Number 3 is control and freedom. You need a sense of control and freedom over your life. If you don't have it, you'll have psychological and physiological consequences, cardiovascular problems in the studies. Number 4 is you need to be pursuing a goal that you think is subjectively meaningful. Meaningful to you. It doesn't mean that everyone in my company has the same goal. Will, over there, his goal is probably something to do with production and storytelling. That's where he gets his meaning. Dom over there probably cares about the fact that we do events and music. It doesn't matter as long as they have their own subjective goal. And number 5, most important of all, because if you don't have this one but you have the other 4, it's still a bad job, is you need to be working with a supportive group of people that you like. And that's really what makes great work. It doesn't really matter what industry you operate in if you have those 5 underlying principles. And so that's what we do in our company. Control and freedom was number 4. So you have to give people that if you want them to be truly motivated.
Love it. Speaking of motivation, in the last session, you mentioned that you were not born into riches. You are self-made, and you also mentioned that your first motivation was you wanted to be just like your neighbors, like your peers, buying new shoes. And I mean, what teenager doesn't want that? But the thing is, when you were able to buy these shoes, how did you keep, did you find a better motivation? Or I mean, how did you find your motivations, and how do you keep yourself motivated?
Yeah, I think in life you have to have your current plan, hypothesis, fail you sometimes to realize that you were wrong. And for me, the reason why my first book is called Happy, Sexy Millionaire is because I found my diary from when I was 18. And bear in mind, at the time when I wrote this diary, my parents weren't speaking to me. I was stealing food to feed myself. I was in Manchester with bailiff letters on my desk. Bailiffs are the people that come to take your stuff when you've spent too much money and you have too many debts. I had 2 CCJs, which is a county court judgment, which means the court are going to, I don't know, you're in trouble with the court as well. I just dropped out of university after 1 lecture, and I wrote in the first page of my diary, my 4 goals before I'm 25. Buy a Range Rover Sport, make £1 million, get in shape, work on my body, and get a girlfriend. This, for me, if I achieved those 4 things, life was done. And then at 25, guess what I have? A Range Rover Sport is my first car. I've made millions. I've got a girlfriend. And I'm still working on the 6-pack, but I'm getting closer to the 6-pack. And yeah, one of the most important things that happened at that time was I met the guy that I was trying to become. There's this guy who I won't name his name, and at 24 years old, I went to his house, and he had the Lamborghini Aventadors out front. I wanted the Lamborghini Aventador. He took me in his room, and I slept that night in his Louis Vuitton room. He had this one room where he had so much Louis Vuitton that he had to just put it in there. I met the guy that I wanted to become. And at 4 a.m., as we're sat by his indoor heated pool, he's a billionaire, he told me he was depressed. He told me he was sad. He said to me, he goes, Steve, sometimes I go to supermarkets and I just push the trolley round and put things in that I'm not going to buy to try and feel normal. He goes, I've been successful in 1 out of 10 things. I'm successful in business, but my health is bad. My relationships are bad. I'm disconnected from my family. He was the most unhappy person I met, and that's who I was trying to become. That night, he asked me to sleep in bed with him because he said he was lonely. This is a 35-year-old man asking me to sleep in bed with him because he's lonely. And just before he got in bed, I saw him get a handful of pills and take the pills. And I'm thinking, this is the guy that I'm working to become. And sometimes in life, that's evidence enough. And that's really when everything fell away in my life. That's when I got rid of my Range Rover. It's when I got rid of my Rolex. I got rid of all my Louis Vuitton. And you will never see me in a different outfit than this one. I go to the gym. This is all I need. The things that matter are my family, my girlfriend, my health, my business, my happiness, Manchester United. That's it.
Love it. Steve, you are the living proof of the benefits of having an unusual or out of the norm reasoning. What is the cost? We know the benefits. Yeah, we see it in you. What is the cost?
The cost is, I think this is important because I think it's really important to look at your life in seasons. And I think of my life in these kind of 5-year seasons. If you're really young, you won't appreciate this because you've not gone through any seasons yet, really. But life is these like 5-year seasons. So like 20 to 25, 25 to 30. And now I'm in the next season, which is like 30 to 35. And in these seasons, your life is in different balance. So, you might be over-indexing a little bit to work and a little bit out of touch with your relationships or, those. And in this season of my life, the trade-off I'm making is probably personal relationships. And the way I've rationalized it to myself, and this might be a lie, because I might be lying to myself to justify my own nonsense, the way I've rationalized it to myself is between 30 and 35, I'm really going to go in to cement my future and all of my sort of future generations. And in this season of my life, I'm going to have a kid, maybe multiple children. And then as I go into the next season of my life, I'll adjust the balance. I won't be in work as much. I won't be as present as much in my work, but then I'll be a father. And so thinking about life in those seasons means that you don't feel the shame or inadequacy or the worry that something's out of balance. The truth is in life, you can't have it all. You can't have it all in any season. So you have to understand the trade-offs you're making, and you have to consciously accept those trade-offs. And any attempt to have it all, to have perfection across the board, perfect health, perfect business, perfect relationship, perfect family, perfect success, reaching your potential, any attempt to have it all will only result in your own feelings of anxiety and worry and insecurity. So I accept the fact that I'm making a trade-off, and I accept the trade-off, and the trade-off will change probably when I have a child.
Oh, wow. I really want my mom to hear this. Maybe she will understand why I'm not in the family meetings as much. Okay, so circling back to the interviews you do, you famously interviewed a lot, some of the world's top leaders. What one thing they seem to have in common? In interviews and off interviews.
God, it's interesting. When I think about the athletes and the really anomalous people, when I say the word anomalous, I mean these people are anomalies. They're different. They're very strange. One of the surprising things they have in common is the world thinks that they are really driven and motivated, but in fact, when you look through their story, about 60, 70% of the time, they had some kind of early trauma. They were bullied in school. They were harassed. They were made to feel less than their peers in some way. And this changed my perspective on what motivation is, because people like me get on stages like this, and we're asked questions about our motivation. How did you achieve all of those things? And we try and give you answers. But the reality of it is oftentimes it was unconscious, it was shame, it was insecurity, it was embarrassment, and you aren't driven, you're just being dragged. And my friend who I mentioned, the guy where I slept in his Louis Vuitton room, when you unpick his story, you're in this mansion, next to this indoor pool, billionaire, 9 sports cars outside. At 4 a.m. when I was talking to him and we were having these deep conversations, he said it to me. He goes, my dad, when I was younger, his dad is a billionaire, always put pressure on me and always said I wasn't good enough. My dad always said I wasn't good enough. The only time in my life when I was happy was when my dad took me to Disneyland. Other than that, it was all pressure. And he said, come with me. And he took me downstairs. And all of downstairs was Mickey Mouse and Disneyland. And then when we went back upstairs and I looked around the house, I realized that everything was Disney. The paintings were Disney. The statues were Disney. And I didn't notice in many respects, we are, as adults, seeking seeking validation from the thing that invalidated us when we were younger. And I think it's important to realize this because if you're driven, you're holding onto the steering wheel and you're intentional. But if you're dragged, you're like attached to the back of the car, being pulled to a place that you don't know. And at 25, when I wanted to be that happy, sexy millionaire with the Range Rover and the six-pack, I was dragged. And I think in this season of life, I have hold of the wheel a little bit more than I used to anyway.
I love it. In your book, you said, and I quote, "The easiest way to do big things is by focusing on the small things."
Yeah.
Right? So what are the things that are often overlooked by entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, such as the ones in this hall here, but you think that are absolutely crucial?
Yeah, so at risk of repeating what we just said in the Q&A, I want to give a bit of background context to this idea. You've probably been told in your life not to sweat the small stuff.
Yes.
It's a well-known phrase, it's a motivational quote, don't sweat the small stuff, which kind of implies don't worry about the small things. But when I've studied great leaders and great entrepreneurs, they do the exact opposite of that. And in fact, why they're successful is their team and them cared more about the small details than everybody else. In business, no matter what business you're in, it is going to be really difficult for you and your team to find a big step forward, a big innovation, a new platform, a new technology that beats your competitors. Really, really difficult. And when you set your team the task of finding a big step forward, you will demotivate them because they will fail. Goes back to what I said about Sir David Brailsford and his cycling team. He focused on the marginal gains. It motivated the team because the progress principle says when we have a small feeling of progress, we are motivated. So going back to this point, I said earlier, the things in life, everything, whether it's your teeth, whether it's your skin, your relationships, your finances, the things in life that are easy to do are also easy not to do. But when I read a book called The Slight Edge at 18 years old, it talked about how in all facets of your life, name a part of your life, right now, it is invisibly compounding for you or against you right now. Everything, your skincare routine, your relationships with your best friends, your money, it's compounding for you or against you. And the problem with this is it's slow, then it's fast, i.e. it's invisible, and then it's sudden, right? So take your teeth. I said in the other room, don't brush your teeth today. You'll be fine, you won't even notice. Don't brush your teeth every day this week, you won't even notice. Every day for 5 years,
you will notice.
a dentist will be pulling them out and you'll be in agony. So the question becomes, when did the decay happen? The decay happened today with a decision that was easy to do, but also easy not to do. So when this became my religious belief in many respects in our businesses, we believe that our competitors, when it comes to making those decisions, won't make them. They won't sweat the small stuff. They won't think it's important. So in the short term, you won't notice a difference, but in 3 years' time, when you look at the trajectory of any part of our business, you'll see we'll end up in a radically different place. And this is the way the world was shaped. If you look at the Grand Canyon, if you look at great rivers that have carved through the world, all that was consistency over time. Water just rolled through there, and it created this national monument in many countries. So it's a religious belief that I have. It's like I really think that the small things really, really matter, and I believe my competitors won't believe in them. In our team, there's 2 phrases that are used more than any. 1%, which is this idea of sweating the small things. We call them 1%. And the other one is failure. We actually have a team called the failure team. We have a head of failure and experimentation. And the crazy thing about the 1% team, and when you create a culture in your team of finding these small gains, this person changed the candle, or this person, and everyone in the company is clapping, it creates this culture where that becomes normalized. And sometimes, as we came to learn, when you think you're turning over a small stone, when you think it's a 1% gain, it ends up being a really, really big thing. And I can tell you now that I changed 10 seconds on the Diary of a CEO podcast, 10 seconds, and it had a 350% impact on the amount of subscribers I get per view. What type of team cares to change 10 seconds? A team that believe 1% matter. And this is the story of our businesses. It's the story of the Diary of a CEO. The Diary of a CEO, as I sit here today, is the fastest growing podcast in the world on YouTube. We did 410,000 new subscribers this month in the last 28 days. If you track that on Social Blade, you go on socialblade.com, it says in 5 years from now, we'll have 78 million subscribers. 4 years ago, we had 0 subscribers. 1 year ago, we had 4 million subscribers. As I sit here today, on YouTube alone, we have 8 million. Think about how that's compounding. What's happening there? I know what's happening. We know what's happening, our team. We're obsessing about tiny details. We're measuring the CO2 levels in the room when the guest arrives, the music we play. We researched Daniel Ek, the founder of Spotify. We researched the music that will make him relax. And we played the Swedish House Mafia when he walked in. Israel Adesanya, the great UFC fighter, we researched the fact that Nipsey Hussle's Double Up takes him back to his childhood and opens him up. And he walked in and he goes, man, I love this song. And we look at each other, we go, yeah, we know. I have a magic trackpad glued under the table in the podcast, and every time the guest says something interesting, I click it. It takes that sentence, tests it with AI, comes back, and if that performs the best, it becomes the title. We test the impact of color. In the last, I would say, 30 days, we've tested 2,000, 3,000 different thumbnails. We've only had 16 episodes. We've tested 2,000, 3,000. I can tell you the impact an exclamation mark has in the title. I can tell you the impact right now off the top of my head that putting quotation marks around the title has 0.2%. Now, I know my competitors won't care, and that is the great advantage that I have. I can actually say this to a room full of people who might be podcasters, and I still know they won't care. They won't think it matters. But zoom out. Zoom out. Look at how Warren Buffett made his money. All he got was 8% a year, but he got it for 80 years. Richest man on earth. The small things.
Love it. What is the longest or hardest lesson that you had to unlearn?
The hardest lesson that I had to unlearn, it's actually a personal one. It's actually, because I think, I sat with a guy called Robert Waldinger, who is from Harvard, the university in America, and he's now the CEO of the longest ever study that's been conducted on human happiness. It's actually ran for 100 years now. So much so that the original scientists on the study have died. And even the people they were originally studying have died, so they're now studying their kids. The longest study on human happiness. And they discovered that the most important thing to be a happy person is the quality of your romantic relationships. Have you got a good partner? Have you got a good wife? Have you got a good husband? And in the studies, they show how many more years you'll live on average, how well you'll be at staving off disease if you have a good romantic partner. So going to your question, the biggest thing I had to unlearn was I grew up in a house where my mother, my Nigerian mother, would scream at my English father for many hours on end. And it taught me that relationships are prison, because I thought my father was in prison. So I got to 25. Think about what I wrote in my diary. I want to have a relationship. The reason I got to 25 and was writing in my diary, I want to have a relationship, is because I was running away from women. I would pursue a woman. I would be attracted to her. The minute she wanted to be in a relationship with me, I would tell her all the reasons why this was a bad idea. And it was a trauma I didn't know I had, so I had to unlearn this lesson, and I did it actually by writing. I developed this habit of writing every single day, and I'd look down every day on my notepad from this bird's eye view at how I felt, and I could see a pattern. And the pattern was this feeling I'd have, and I asked myself, when was the first time you had that feeling? Well, it was when I watched my father. I was stood in the corner of the room at 7 years old watching my mum scream at my dad. That's the only other time I've had the feeling. I had to unlearn it. And unlearning anything starts with a really difficult first step, which is awareness, self-awareness. And awareness is hard. The best way I found to become more self-aware is writing, podcasting, and creating a medium where you can look down on yourself on a piece of paper or in another form. So yeah.
Love it. Ladies and gentlemen, appreciate your time. Thank you, Steve,
Thank you
for
so much.
joining, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Maitha, and thank you, Stephen. That was very inspiring and very motivational. Thank you very much.